So, good afternoon to all the participants. And last week, rather last class, I completed the interaction of radiation with matter. So, today I'll give a brief idea about the radiation detection and its measurement. Again, giving full details is not possible, but let us see some principles. So, prior to that, I would like to recollect the conclusions of last lecture. Yes, that is the starting point for our today's lecture. And if you recollect, or if you have opened your PowerPoint project or your notes, we have discussed that alpha, beta, gamma radiations are called ionization radiations because they cause ionization and excitation while going through the matter. They also cause dissociation, which is not that useful for radiation detection. And interaction depends on the number density of the atoms and atomic number. And detection and measurement depend on unique signal generation. Range of the radiation in the matter decides the detector configuration. Charged particles interact by Coulombic interaction, whereas interaction of gamma rays, X-rays, and neutrons, which do not have charge, is a two-step process. First, they have to be absorbed and transfer the energy. The second one is subsequently, if it produces a charged particle, for example, in the case of photon, it is electron, and in the case of neutrons, charged particles, they act as the agents for the detection. And so in this two-step process, obviously, in most of the cases, efficiency will be a bit low. And the interaction is probabilistic. So exponential nature, it depends. It depends on exponential nature. Leaving that at that stage, we will proceed with the radiation detection and its measurement. And the plan of the talk is that I'll give the general principle, then give a block diagram of a counting system, and then some features of detectors, various types of detectors. Gas field detectors I'll take some time because this is one of the important class of detectors which are essentially very cheap as far as the cost is concerned. And then scintillation detectors, semiconductor detectors, and of course, if time permits, miscellaneous detectors, but in all probability, I'll skip it. Then I will summarize all the discussions. Again, I'll be giving another assignment on the last two lectures, as well as on these lectures, maybe by Tuesday, Wednesday. I'll send to Anurag or Parthasarathi, they will upload. So what is the general principle? This one projection is important to get an idea about the radiation detection and measurement. And in fact, a similar thing will be there for every detector, whatever you use in your measurements. So radiation while processing, first and foremost thing we should understand, how do we generate the signal? How to measure that signal? And what is the material? And how to manipulate the signal so that we will get a readable data and correlate the readable data to the so that we will get the required analytical numbers like a concentration of different nucleides or intensity of radiations or energy of radiation, so forth, so on, so forth. So how do we generate the signal? If you recollect the interaction of radiation with matter, radiation while passing through the matter may interact with the matter. It results in excitation and ionization. Ultimate interaction is with the electron. And this excitation or ionization will form the basic signal. Let us move on with the ionization. So electron, current, or voltage. It all depends how we manipulate. Measuring this signal will give a clue for radiation's presence. And if you can quantify it, we get the quantitative information. In most of the cases, signal is charge production in the detector volume. And therefore, detector material should be good for collecting the signal. Then only we call a good detector. And there are some more qualifications. While choosing the detector, we have to think about those things, consider those things. Signal is generally small. Therefore, we use an amplifier to amplify the signal and process it further. When we measure only the intensity, we call it as gross counting. In fact, from that only, the name counters and counting systems have come. And if we measure intensity as a function of energy, then what we observe is a spectrum. And in that spectrum, you see quite a few peaks. And the peak position or centroid represents the energy of radiation. And the peak area represents the intensity of that particular ray, let us say gamma spectrum, that particular gamma ray. And that will be related to the emission probability. And from there, we can get the concentration of the isotopes. Now, typical block diagram of a counting system consists of obviously detector. Then you keep a sample here. We will put a source here so that the emitted radiations will fall on the detector. Then when the radiation interacts with the matter, it will produce ionization, let us assume in this case. Then those ions should not recombine, so you apply voltage. And then the signal which is produced, you have to shape it using a preamplifier. From the signal from preamplifier, we have to amplify it, and then we use an analyzer. A is analyzer. There are a variety of analyzers. It can be a single channel analyzer with a timer scaler, or analog to digital converter with a multi-channel analyzer, or simply timer scaler in the case of counters. These are the parts of the block diagram of a counting system. Now, some important features when we talk about the detectors, before we go into the detectors or details of the detectors, we should remember always efficiency is an important thing, whether it is in our performance or detection performance or anywhere. Efficiency, what is the percentage of efficiency, we should know. Then the resolution, energy resolution is very important if you are doing spectroscopic studies. The meaning of this is, if there are two gamma rays, let us say in gamma spectrometry, of nearby energy, then the capability of resolving them as two separate signals is called energy resolution. And linearity, this is another vital thing, because we get a pulse height for a particular radiation after interaction in the detector. And the pulse height that is produced should have linearity with the initial energy. Otherwise, it will be difficult to understand what could be the energy of the radiation that is interacting. So linearity is very important. Dead time is another important aspect where detector becomes inactive or dead depending on the count rate of the sample as well as the electronics. There are a variety of reasons. Mainly the sample dose is the reason. And of course, electronics also. So dead time, if we know, we can correct for it so that we will get the exact intensity of that particular radiation. And rest of the considerations is money related. Ease of manufacture is the one. Accordingly, price will be changed. Then maintenance, what is the running cost? For example, if you use the semiconductor detectors, most of the times we have to use liquid nitrogen while using them. We have to cool them. And of course, cost, price of the detector. These are the considerations we have to see. First four are technical, next three are related to the money. Now, I have given some examples here, some names of the detectors here are class of detectors, and I have given their use. One means gross counting, 2 means spectrometric utilization, and efficiency and the resolutions and price I have given. Ion chambers, they can be used for both gross counting and spectrometric applications. Efficiency is poor, resolution is okay, price is very low. Proportional counters, it can be used for both the purposes. Efficiency is reasonable. They are having a reasonable resolution, or rather good resolution. And again, price, the cost of these detectors is simple. We can fabricate in our laboratories. GM counters, that is the cheapest and oldest detector. And in the earlier days of, in the 20s of last century, up to 20s of last century, these were the only detectors. Why 20s up to 30s of last century? These were the only detectors that were used. Their efficiency is good. And of course, there is no resolution because it is only useful for gross counting, which I will explain in the next 3-4 slides. And price is absolutely low. And the scintillation detectors, the next class of detectors are scintillation detectors. Sodium iodide doped with thallium, cesium iodide doped with sodium, and BGO detectors. These are also a class of semiconductors. And this will be useful for both gross counting and spectrometric applications. Efficiency is good, and resolution, of course, is poor, and price is medium price. Whereas zinc sulfide is one of the oldest scintillation detectors, and it's simply a paste is made, and on a screen one can paint it. A screen can be painted, that will be used as a detector. This is exactly for gross counting, and efficiency is very good. Again, resolution is nil because there is no differentiation between the radiations, and price is low. Organic mixtures can be used as scintillation detectors. In fact, they are very good. But again, this is for the gross counting. There is no, I mean, very difficult. Of course, nowadays people do get alpha spectrometric applications, but generally very difficult to get the spectrometric measurements. Efficiency is excellent. In fact, for alpha detection, you can go as near as 100 as the sample is immersed in the mixture. That is, all is surrounded by the detector material. Resolution is poor, and of course, price is pretty low. And another type of and most important and extensively used detectors in many laboratories are semiconductor-based detectors, high-purity germanium detectors, silicon doped with lithium, and silicon surface barrier detectors. Mainly, they are used for spectrometry. In principle, gross counting can be done. It is unwise to use for the gross counting. And efficiency is okay, and resolution is excellent. And price, of course, is high. This BGO means bismuth germanium oxide. This acts as a semiconductor. Now, I will talk about the gas field detectors now. This is if you understand these 3-4 slides, it will give you an idea about the interaction of radiation with matter as well as how to get the signal out of it. Particularly a term called gas multiplication, how it can be used for different detectors. All the 3 types of detectors I gave in the earlier table, like ionization chambers, proportional counters, and GM counters, principle can be understood from this simple graph. And as such, they are based on very similar explanation, but there is a variation. Just let us see how to fabricate a simple detector. It's a metallic tubular structure with a central anode wire, which is very thin. And obviously, when you want to get the signal out of it, if you if there is no insulator here, there won't be anything we will be seeing. So insulators have to separate. And then we measure the ionization produced across an applied voltage is applied, an applied voltage is applied, a voltage is applied here, and the ionization produced is measured as over a capacitor as charge, or the charge measured. Ionization means charge measured across a capacitor, and that will be discharged across a resistor, and we create either a voltage pulse or a current pulse, depending on our applications. This is the general principle and a pictorial block diagram of a gas filled detector. Now let us see what is the detector material here. We normally fill this detector with gases like argon or helium, even cooking gas, Prussian gas. So detector material is the gas. Therefore, detectors are called gas-filled detectors. Now, how it works? See, there is a detector material here, and you keep a radiation source here, and the radiation that is anywhere, right? So that the radiations have to enter the detector, and radiation source, the radiations emitted from the radiation source enter this detector. We make a provision by using a thin window. Okay. And thin window, when I say in the thickness, it will be opaque to the eye. Now, when the radiation passes through and enters the detector, we have already seen in the interaction of radiation with matter, when an alpha particle or a beta particle or radiation, when it enters medium, it interacts coulombically with the electrons that are in the medium. So these gas molecules are having lots of electrons, is it not? Depending on the formula, you know rest. So the first obvious thing is the radiation will interact coulombically and produce ionization. Suppose we don't do anything, what will happen? They combine, they recombine, is it not? Like when you heat a metallic foil or metallic wire, you leave it in the air, it will dissipate its heat and gets cooled. So exactly here, the ionization produced will be recombining with the positive ions, electrons and positive ions recombine. Therefore, you don't get any signal. So how to get the signal? Then this role of voltage will come. Because of applying this voltage, electrons will be pulled towards the central wire and positive ions move towards the cathode, that is the body. Then accordingly, you generate a pair of charge carriers, and you get a charge. Electrons will start moving to the anode, so you get a charge here. So the purpose of this voltage is not to allow recombination of the initial ions that are produced due to the radiation phenomena, interaction of radiation. So what happens is, if the voltage is 0, you don't see anything here. What is the y-axis? Pulse height. Pulse height means number of ion pairs, essentially number of electrons. Okay, in this case, in this arrangement. So if the voltage is 0, we will not get any signal. Once we start increasing voltage, let us say next time we will put 10 volts, then there will be a competition between ionization and recombination. Ionization, radiation interaction produce ions, and recombination, natural phenomena that is, reduces the ionization. Therefore, there will be a tussle from 0 volts to up to a particular voltage, where there will be a few ions left that will conduct. So a stage will come around certain voltage, typical geometry, about 100 volts in this case. In this case, there will be all the ions will be collected. All the ions will be collected. And from there onwards, even if you give small increment of voltage, then what happens is, still this total ionic current will remain constant, or the pulse height will remain constant, because ion pairs will, number of ion pairs per event, we will call it as pulse height. Okay, so it will remain as constant. So this constancy is extremely useful for using that region, is this detector with this voltage window as a detector material, and this we call ionization chamber. Now, imagine here, suppose we increase further the voltage further. What will happen? See, we have the provision here to change the voltage. What happens? Electrons are produced at the point of interaction, and from there they are moving towards the anode. Now, what will happen is, if you are increasing the voltage between these two, anode and cathode, this anode and cathode, the electric field will increase. Once electric field is increasing and a charge particle is there, in fact a pair are there, then they get accelerated. When they get accelerated, their kinetic energy will increase, and this effect will be felt more on the electron, being a lighter particle. And therefore, what happens is the moment the kinetic energy exceeds the binding energy of the electron of the molecules, then there will be additional ionization. Or in other words, ionization is getting multiplied in gas. So olden days, a word is used, gas multiplication. Actually, ionization is getting multiplied in the gas. So what happens is, this is a logarithm scale. Please note this. So the pulse height, or the number of ion pairs, goes on increasing with the applied voltage. Of course, when we make a detector, we fix the voltage. So then we know what is the multiplication factor here. Now let us see only this curve, which is for alpha. This I will explain. Beta curve I will explain later when we go to the GM counter. So what happens is, with the increase in voltage, with the increase in applied voltage, the pulse height starts increasing. A stage will come in this region, that is between V1 and V2. Up to this point, the pulse height goes on increasing, but a constant value at any given applied voltage. So there is a linear relation between the initial energy and the multiplication factor. Therefore, we know for a primary ion pair, that is initial interaction with the gas molecules, the number of ions that are produced is primary ionization. There will be a multiplication factor at, let us say, at this voltage M. Then we know how many number of ion pairs that are possible to produce at this voltage. Therefore, we know the pulse height. And from that, we can get back to the energy. So that proportionality is maintained in this region. That entire region is called proportional region. And this is extremely useful for radiation detection, both for gross counting and spectrometric applications. Now, what happens is, at this stage onwards, from here to here. Now, let us say we apply voltage further, right? Now, what is happening now? Electrons are moving fast. Electrons are moving fast in the applied field, electric field produced because of the applied voltage, and they are reaching. What happens to the positive ions? Positive ions have to come to here, that is the surrounding the tube. Then what happens is, it will form concentric layers because they are slow. Think about argon. Argon ion is having 37 mass units, whereas electron is having 0.0005, is it not? So that because of the huge difference, electrons will reach, positive ions are left behind. Therefore, you will feel as if you have another electrode, this positive sheath layer. Or in other words, electric field which is expected to be generated will be reduced. Two things we have to remember here. Here, with the voltage, multiplication is increasing. but at the same time, it is not increasing as expected, like in the proportional region. Therefore, this entire region is called limited proportional region. So here it is a recombination region. Here it is saturation. All the ions are collected. Here the multiplication is beginning and it is a proportional region. And here the proportionality is reduced, though multiplication is increasing. So this will not give much idea about the initial energy. Therefore, it is not that useful. Now, let us see what happens here. So once you get this positive cloud in the space of that tube, then what will happen is at some stage, see, the moment you see a concentric sheath of positive charge, the applied electric field is reducing. A stage will come where the reduction in the applied field will remain almost constant. And that is the region where you get the same pulse height for a given voltage, same pulse height, irrespective of the initial number of ions that are produced because of the radiation interaction. And there we lose the idea about which type of radiation is causing the ionization and how much amount of energy it is giving, how many number of ions are produced. All the information is lost, except that there was an initial ionization, primary ionization. Therefore, I get this height. And this region is called GM region. If you go on increasing voltage further, what will happen? There is a layer of positive layer of the charge. Electrons are reaching the anode. Then these positive ions, because of they're also moving. Because of that, they will be in excited state. When they de-excited, they can produce a photon. That photon can interact at the anode surface by photoelectric effect. It can produce another electron. This electron does not have any relation to the initial interaction of the radiation. Therefore, that will lead to an avalanche, and that avalanche will spoil the detector characteristics, and the fill gas, the detector gas gets discharged. Therefore, we lose information, even the detector will spoil. That is why we always tell, if you get a working region of the voltage, use it less than half of it, so that we will not touch by mistake the discharge region. So let us recollect, the first region is a competition between the ionization and recombination. That is not useful for radiation detection. When we increase voltage from V0 to V1, any particular point you can fix, because there the number of pulse height, that is number of ion pairs produced, is constant for initial, rather all the charges collected, there is no multiplication. So this is called ionization region because all the ions are collected. It is useful for detection. Whereas between V1 and V2, the ionization gets multiplied, which is called gas multiplication. And generally this value varies between 10 power 4 to 10 power 6. That means for initial primary 1 ion, multiplication will take it to as high as 10 power 4 to 10 power 6, depending on the geometry and applied voltage, both. And from V2 to V3, multiplication no doubt increases, but the linearity is lost. Therefore, this is also not useful. That is called limited proportional region. Whereas between V3 and V4, at a given voltage, the number of ions produced are constant irrespective of how many initial ions are produced. Therefore, here the information on the extent of energy that is deposited initially is lost. Subsequently, the type of radiation also is lost. That is called GM region. And this is the region where, because of the non-correlated de-excitation of the excited positive ions and subsequent photoelectric effect, electrons not related to the primary ionization will be produced. So gas discharge takes place. That is an useless region. It is called discharge region. Now we should understand that how many ion pairs can be produced initially. You see, if the binding energy of the electron is about, let's say, 10 to 12 EV, on an average, 25 to 30 EV is required to produce one effective ion pair. That is against the recombination. By just increasing the voltage, we cannot stop the recombination. Also, there are many non-radiative processes where we lose. So on an average, 2.5 to 3 times of energy is required to produce one ion pair. Let us say we have 2 MeV beta radiation and divide by the 25 EV, that is 2 into 10 power 6 by 2.5, you get about something like 4,000 ion pairs initially. Okay, 4,000 ion pairs. 40,000 ion pairs initially per beta radiation. Whereas even if one radiation is there, you get the same pulse height in GM region. Whereas in the case of alpha, suppose somehow you introduce the alpha particle into the medium, because we know that a thin paper also can stop, right? You introduce the alpha source, we have ways to introduce the alpha source. Then an alpha particle of 8 MeV accordingly will produce about something like 3.5 million ion pairs initially. Therefore, initial pulse height for alpha is much higher than the beta. But a stage will come where it doesn't make a sense in GM region, because just one ion pair, initial ion pair is there, you get the same height. If you have 10, you get the same height, right? Therefore, this region is useful to identify, to know that there is radiation present and quantify it, but we will not know which one will be the radiation, whether it's alpha or beta or gamma, we don't know. So this is an important slide, and if you get some doubts, you can write here. Otherwise, later also you can ask. Okay. The explanation what I gave, I described in the next 2 slides, so I will not spend time on that. Okay. Now, I will give you some examples on ionization chamber. As I told just now, regions 2, 3, and 5 are useful for radiation, for making the radiation detectors. First one, that region 2 is called ion chambers, region 3 proportional counters, region 5 are called GM counters. Unlike in regions 2 and 3, I explained just now, type of radiation in region 5 will not be known. So I'll just give an example about ionization chamber and move on to the scintillation detectors. Okay, now, so the typical fill gases, the geometry is very similar to one that what I gave in the 3 slides before, and you can choose your geometry. That's not an issue, right? Here, I gave a few examples of the fill gas. There are the detectors, is it not? Yeah, as far as the metallic part is concerned, it is a container only. So basic signal is pair of electrons and positive ions, but electron is measured. Now, voltage, depending on the geometry, it is always, electric field is important. Applied field gives a particular electric field depending on the distance between the 2 electrodes and the thickness of the anode wire. Okay, so this E should be small e. Okay, 10 to 200 volts, depending on the configuration, one can use. We have something in our laboratory where I work, it used to be 100 volts, depends on the energy. On an average, 30 to 35 electron volts are required to produce one effective ion pair. It is not the binding energy, it is not ionization potential. To have one effective ion pair, you need this much energy. Okay, now argon, on an average this value. For argon, if it is beta, 26.4, but it doesn't matter, alpha or beta, value will be more or less same. But for alpha, it will be a bit more accurate than beta, that you know in the interaction itself. So for argon, it is 26.4 and energy required to produce one ion pair. Suppose you have about, I told in the example, let's say 2.6 MeV beta, then you get a lakh ion pairs in the initial interaction. If you put a bit of voltage, they can be separated, you produce the ion current. And helium, it is 41.3, hydrogen 36.5, nitrogen 34.8, air 33.8, oxygen, of course, normally people don't use 30.8, methane 27.3. And remember that particularly when you go into the region of GM region or where high multiplication is there, it is avoidable not to have water vapor, what we call humidity, or even oxygen, because it has a tendency of getting attached to an electron. So obviously signal will be reduced. Then we have to correct for it. Okay, these are the ionization chambers detector materials. Normally ionization chambers are used to measure high dose radiation samples, and in some cases it is used for spectrometric work. We leave that there, and other two detector types you have to read for yourself. Just to give an idea, I gave ionization chamber. Now let us move on to the scintillation detectors. The name scintillation, chamakraya, means that is giving a scintillation that can be seen. And of course, if you recollect Rutherford's experiment, they used to get trained to see the scintillation produced on a zinc screen with the naked eye. Now we are fortunate, we have a photomultiplier tube which can be used in that place. We need not worry about training ourselves. And of course, this will be more accurate instrumental wise. Now, what are the scintillation detector materials? You have organic materials, you have inorganic materials. And organic materials like anthracene, plastics, mixtures, and mixtures of solutions can be used as scintillation materials. Then you have to keep that in a container which has to be hermetically sealed to a photomultiplier tube, and so that the signal what you are getting, either the light signal what you are getting, you can collect it and convert into a signal. I will show at the end of 2 slides about principle of PMT. Whereas in the case of inorganic scintillators like sodium iodide thallium, cesium iodide thallium, BGO, barium fluoride, etc., they are all having crystalline structure, and they will act as the semiconductors. What is semiconductor? You know the meaning of, I think I might have talked in the last class. Otherwise, you all know this, that a conductor is the one, you know the meaning of band gap, that is the gap between the valence band and conduction band. For good conductors, it is 0, like gold, aluminum, copper. For insulators, it's more than 6 eV. And for in between, we call semiconductors. And germanium and silicon are very good semiconductors. Whereas we can make the semiconductor materials by combinations. And here we have to remember, once you have crystalline structure, the valence bond corresponds to the bunching of electrons which are attached to the lattice. Whereas conduction bands, there's a combined energy, combined band, they move freely in the crystal and corresponds to the combined, you call combined probability or wave function, whatever you call, that's bunching together, I will call, for simplicity, that is called conduction band. And the gap between these things is called band gap. Now, you take a typical inorganic crystalline material like sodium iodide, let's say thallium is not doped, then the band gap corresponds to 3 to 4 eV. Then what happens is, when a radiation passes through this matter or interacts, falls on this material, then this energy will be transferred to electrons or the material and then to the electrons, which will move to the conduction band. While they are going to the conduction band, a hole will be left behind. And if there is an electron here, that electron will come and occupy here, then hole appears as if it has moved here. Both electrons and holes together are called a pair exciton. And movement of this both electron and hole will create your signal. Exciton is the signal. When this excited state comes down to de-excites, then a photon will be emitted. And this photon corresponds to UV region. And therefore, and most of the photomultiplier tubes are not compatible to UV region in those days. Of course, nowadays people, fabricated the UV compatible PMTs also. And therefore, what is done is, it is doped with the material that has intermediate states. And that doping is called activation, and the material is called activator. It has the intermediate levels. And remember that this, when radiation interacts with the sodium iodide thallium, when it is interacting, it can transfer the energy which will take to conduction band. While coming back, it may come directly, or it can come through the activator excited state and de-excites to ground state, and this energy gap corresponds to visible region. And now, it is not the only process. It can as well ionize here, excite the electron from here to here. This may, in the path, go here and ionize the ground state activator ion, and that results to that creates an excited state of the activator, which reaches here. And when it is de-exciting, that also can cause emit a photon that corresponds to visible region. So the net process is that this doping or activating with thallium idea is to have the emitted photons in the visible region, so that PMT is compatible with these photons, or the photocathode of the PMT will undergo a photocathode interaction. I will explain that later. So the whole idea is shifting of wavelength or shifting of the energy of the emitted photon. So initially, let us say 1 MeV photon is there, gamma ray is there. In principle, it has to produce 1 divided by 6 excitations. But instead, it will produce much lower because there are so many steps. Because of these steps, the first is it has to interact. That is the first thing. That depends, if you remember, on the atom density and atomic number. And now, over and above, when it is interacting, it should lead to a process in which it will go to the excited state. Excited state has to be populated, and the de-excitation process has to take place. And in the de-excitation process, these two levels have to be involved. So on an average, 100 to 300 electron volts is spent to produce one effective photon, which is the representative of the initial gamma ray to be available at photocathode of PMT. Therefore, the number of effective photons that form the signal will be reduced. Obviously, if the number of photons produced, measurable photons are reduced, then the resolution, which is square root of that, proportional to square root of that, will be inferior. Because suppose you produce about, let us say, for simplicity of calculation, 10,000 photons at this stage. At this stage, let us say you produce 10,000 photons for initial one high energy gamma. then what happens is square root of that 100 into the energy required is 200. 200 into 100 will become something like 20 kV. Resolution will be pretty poor. If you use a good semiconductor, you can get resolution as low as 1.5 to 2 kV, right? That's why we have to have, this has to be reduced. This resolution, whatever we do in inorganic scintillators, resolution will be poorer because many steps are involved. So the entire phenomena is radiation has to interact. For that you need reasonably high Z material. Iodine meets that requirement in sodium and thallium. Then the de-excited photon, which is the primary signal, that has to be compatible with the PMT. For that you need activator atoms have to be added, so steps are increased, and that is compatible, but because the number of steps involved are more, therefore resolution becomes poor. Okay, now, so this is the thing what I explained. Interaction of radiation creates scintillations, and that light intensity will be related to the, it gives information on both the energy. This energy is related to the number of photons that are produced, and intensity is how many such events are taking place. So it is useful to get the information both on the energy of the radiation and its intensity. Light falls on the photocathode, and photoelectric effect takes place. An electron is produced, and that electron, an arrangement will be made to get multiplication, so signal enhancement will be there, and that is collected at the anode after the last dynode. I will explain both the meaning of it. So many steps are involved, starting from interaction to producing a visible compatible photon to photoelectric cathode interaction, and then multiplication, etc. Therefore, resolution using the scintillation detector is poor, but a very useful class of detectors. We can measure alpha, beta, gamma, and X-ray spectroscopy, and it's really extremely useful and reasonably cheaper price-wise. So what is photomultiplier tube? Photomultiplier tube, by name, this is photon multiplication, and it is in the tube structure. How it is? A photon, de-exciting photon, will fall on the photocathode. It is hermetically sealed, and this will, the electron that is emitted is projected onto a metal plate, which is in a curved shape with a big aperture. And these electrons are attracted towards it if its voltage is slightly higher than the voltage applied here. Now what happens is, in the process, it is an average 100 volts, right? If you are using 100 volts, whatever is the energy photon, you know, energy is equal to kinetic energy gained will be charge into voltage applied. So 100 EV energy is produced. And what you need is for ionization here about 2 to 3 EV. So one electron will create more electrons here, 7 to 8 electrons, depends on the configuration and voltage you apply. Now you put another metallic plate here, a shape identical with an angular adjustment. Then what will happen is, while attracting the electrons in the beginning, now it will eject the electrons. Why? Because the voltage here is higher than this. So initially it acts as anode. When it sees the another plate with higher energy, it will act as cathode. Therefore, it is called dynode, both the electrodes. A dynode, all these are dynodes, means it will act as the two nodes, anode and cathode. So at each dynode, multiplication of signal will take place, and at the end, use an anode and take a deflector and collect all the charge produced and across a resistance, and you can convert this into a voltage pulse or charge pulse, generally voltage pulse. So this is the thing what you have to remember. You have to have a material which is very efficient to convert the initial photon into to undergo photoelectric effect so that an electron is produced. Photoelectric effect, if you remember day for yesterday's class. And those electrons have to be multiplied, keep dynode slightly at a higher voltage compared to the voltage you are giving here. Then give another, normally 5 volts increment is given. And then here, this will have slightly more than this. So at each stage, number of electrons that are produced initially get multiplied. One can achieve 10 power 6 to 10 power 7 times enhancement of the signal. The rest of the things are same. So it is photo multiplier tube. In fact, it is electron multiplier. Means photon is initial part. So PMT. This is the meaning of PMT. Hope you understand the principle. Now let us move to the semiconductors. I don't want to give details, cannot give details in 1 hour. So here the band gap is low. What are the materials I just told? Germanium and silicon, the best semiconductors. For germanium, it is 0.69. I think for silicon, it is 1.01 EV. Relatively low efficiency, Z is low, right? And while in use, you have to use the liquid nitrogen, and good electronic units are requirement because you are getting extremely nice signal. So you have to use good electronics. Obviously, price is high. Applications are many: alpha spectrometry, gamma and X-ray spectrometry, etc. Extremely useful. And if you go to any good radiochemistry, nuclear physics laboratories, invariably, or nuclear analytical labs, invariably you see a few detectors. Now, I will just give a conceptual idea about the semiconductor detectors, and then we move on with 1 or 2 spectra. I already explained in the case of scintillators, the meaning of valence band and conduction band, and the gap for germanium is 0.69 EV. And if you have small impurity, periodic table impurity can be there. You know that neighbors enter into your house freely, right? So a germanium can have, these are all 4th group material. You can have 5th group material, then extra electron will be there. Or you can have 3rd group material, a electron deficiency will be there. So a metallurgical impurities, crossed periodic table if you remember. So even the impurity at the level of parts per million will cause enough, will produce enough charge carriers. In fact, majority of the charge will be carried by this. Suppose if it has an extra electron, because of the impurity atom, then you get a donor level. Such time is called N-type, negative. Remember negative, N-type. If you have an acceptor, let's say 3rd group or 1st group element as impurity, then you will have an acceptor level close to valence band, which is called P-type, or remember positive. And think about these two together are brought in contact. Then what will happen? And apply a voltage such that electrons and holes move towards the center, get neutralized, and intrinsic zone is produced. And this is a good material for the detector. Why you need charge-free zone? Because see, since the band gap is so low, even the ambient temperature and light can cause excitations. Thermal excitations are common. That is the reason why we cool these things. In addition, we have to make sure that if there is an electron moving in this or a hole is moving in this, we should ensure that that is subsequent to the interaction of radiation with matter, not because of the ambient conditions. That's why we go for the pure materials. That is why this detector, high pure germanium detector material, has come with the technological innovations. So we will not go into details. And here you apply reverse bias voltage such that these will be pulled further back so that you get the thick intrinsic zone. We will leave it at the stage. So once it is, you have some idea. Now I'll just go through quickly with 2 examples because we are really running short of time. There are a variety of semiconductor detectors with different configurations. Depending on the application, we have to choose the volume. Suppose you are doing a alpha spectrometry, there is no need to have a huge detector because volume decides the price also. So you need a thin, wafer thin. Why? A paper can stop alpha particles. Therefore, you need a thin detector, and also you have to maintain this in the vacuum so that alpha particles move towards the detector. And silicon-based detector normally detectors you think about here do not need cooling. Germanium-based detectors need liquid nitrogen temperature because band gap is 0.69. So even normal light or the variation, small variation in the ambient temperature can give enough background which is not correlated to your sample. So applications are alpha, gamma, X-ray spectrometry. Resolution is excellent. Efficiency varies from low to good. Nowadays, high volume detectors are made. Efficiency is improving. Of course, we compromise slightly on the resolution. Good electronics are a must. Cost is high. Maintenance is very demanding. Now, let me give you one alpha spectrum. Surface barrier detectors are used for alpha spectrometric measurements. Thin detectors, as I told just now, because alpha range is very small in any material. So N-type material is used and surface is etched with gold layer for electrical conductivity. And you remember the shape of the thing. I suppose all of you are seeing my photo is coming. You see this. Left side, there is a degradation in the energy. Right side is symmetric. So this left side degradation is because of alpha particle undergoing the collisions. Where is it undergoing? It is undergoing collisions or collisional loss. One is it is made into thin source, yet there will be molecular layers. While it is coming out of the source, when alpha is emitted from the interior, they will undergo collisions with the same material and its energy will be degraded. And then in the detector, suppose you have a detector like this, and whatever is the vacuum you create, you won't create absolute vacuum. Some molecules will, air molecules will still be inside. The collisions with them also will reduce the energy. And when it enters the detector surface, in the surface also, there can be degradation because of electrical contact, etc. Therefore, in alpha spectrum, you see a symmetric shape after the peak position, whereas to the left of it, there is a degradation. And we always take resolution as the width of the peak in the Gaussian shape, assuming Gaussian shape. But right side, there cannot be increase in energy, only decrease. So right side is not affected. So we take half of that, and from that we double it, because left side you cannot take. This is a typical spectrum, and just I'm giving cursory details. Now, this is about a gamma ray spectrum of one activated Jerkli sample in our own laboratory we have done. Here you see most of the gamma rays appear as lines, but yet they have a small distribution. That's the natural distribution. But the beauty of gamma ray spectrometry is that in one go you can determine many isotopes. That is the beauty of the gamma ray spectrometric application. That is multi-element analysis. Particularly in analytical chemistry, you find a lot of applications. Similarly, if you do nuclear fission studies or nuclear reactions, I don't know, Tomur may give an example, both you will be covering. And gamma spectrometry is one of the best techniques to use because simultaneously some 30, 40 products one can measure. And before I almost completed my lecture, I want to give you an idea about a resolution. I already told resolution actually what we expect the shape of a gamma ray peak is Gaussian distribution, which is natural distribution. And that width will, this is given by, probability is given by 1 by 2 pi sigma square exponential minus peak position you call E minus EI whole square by 2 sigma square DE. That is the relation for the probability or the count at the each stage. Okay, this y-axis is the number of counts or intensity of that channel, and this side is channel which is related to the energy. Now we measure the full width at off maximum. This is maximum. At off maximum we measure. This is related to the resolution by 2.35 times. Means FWHM is 2.35 times. So measure FWHM, from that calculate sigma. Then we can talk about resolution. Similarly for alpha, you measure first half FWHM and multiply by 2. Here there is a comparison between sodium, a spectrum obtained by sodium iodide thallium and germanium detector. And the source is 137 cesium. I mentioned on in the radioactivity time or so, or in the alpha decay, beta decay. This 137 cesium is a gamma standard, which emits 661.6 keV, and this gamma ray is, again, this is seen as the de-excitation in 137 barium, but attributed to 137 cesium. And here, when you talk about good sodium iodide detector, the resolution is 56 kV at 661 kV. Whenever you quote a resolution, percentage is not a good one, but you have to quote the actual value at what energy. That's very important. Whereas the same one, if you use germanium, it is just 1.85 kV. This is the difference. Obviously, if you have two gamma rays nearby with a difference of 3-4 keV, normally twice the FWHM, then you will get two separate peaks. Whereas in the case of sodium iodide thallium, you won't get that resolution. But don't forget that if you integrate the area under this peak after subtracting the background, and that refers to that is directly related to the intensity and directly related to the concentration of that isotope. Sodium iodide thallium will give a higher value because efficiency of the sodium iodide thallium is better than the germanium, right? These 2 points we should understand. I would have loved to explain all these things, except that I just want to say this is called Compton edge, and this is a Compton continuum, and so on and so forth. For this, we need a special class. I just want to say that sodium iodide thallium detector is efficient, but resolution is not good, but not very bad. Whereas germanium is it is having extremely good resolution, but efficiency is lower. And at this stage, probably I will close. And gamma spectrometry applications are many. You can read yourself all these things. Any field you talk, you will get an application of gamma ray spectrometry, but you have to have a radioisotope, or you produce the activity by activation. Now you think about X-ray spectrum. This is a plutonium LX-ray region. Here also, silicon, extremely good resolution. You can see all the X-rays, and they can be quantitatively related to plutonium concentration. Both gamma ray spectrometry, X-ray spectrometry, there is an internal calibration. For the same isotope, we may get 2-3 signatures, which will give internal cross-checking, internal validation. So you can get the concentration of that isotope by using 3 or 4 characteristic gamma rays or X-rays. Then you know that how consistent are your measurements, or for that matter, efficiency of the detector, and so on and so forth, right? So at this stage, I have to close because already I have come to this is 4:07 time in my watch. So I will summarize. Detection and measurement depend on unique signal generation. For that, we should understand the interaction of radiation with matter. In the first lecture, I dealt with that. Range decides the detector size and configuration. A variety of detectors are available. Information on intensity and quantity of radioactive materials can be obtained. Gas field detectors are cheap but extremely useful. Intensity and energy identification of isotopes is possible, and which we did. Gamma ray spectrometry is versatile. Neutrons, Materials should act as target and detector, which I explained in the last class. Standard electronic units and good computers are assets. At this stage, I thank you and close the lecture.